Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I know it's 5 o'clock Eastern time. If you're on the Eastern Coast, I appreciate you coming in at this time. If you're in the Pacific Coast, your afternoon has begun. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you today. My name is Ruth Brus. I'm the Vice President of Media at Media Education for Market Development. And I'm also the Executive Director at the Center for College and Career Readiness. So I kind of live in both worlds. I do a lot of research through the center, and I do a lot of marketing and really working with client engagement with media. So it's a win-win for me, and I love being in both worlds. Today, I'm going to share with you our time together about student engagement and are you truly hitting a brick wall, and share with you some of the research that we have come together and really looking at why students aren't always at that level that we want them to be at when it comes to learning. And I'm going to focus on how we can measure engagement in preparation for really understanding how to get students ready for learning. I'm going to share some engagement research information from the book Whole. And I'm also going to share two tools, Rhithm and Anira. These are two tools that measure engagement readiness and whether it's leading engagement or lagging. And you'll understand that when I get to that information. So the first thing I want to start with is talking about what is engagement. We really have to have a common understanding of what engagement is and what it does mean. And for today, I want us to think about what often happens for our students is that we somehow have a narrow view. We're looking for students that are engaged by looking to see if their eyes are looking at us, or if they're smiling, if they're quiet. We're looking for those outward things that we can see. However, when we don't really look internally at what our students are believing in and thinking and really paying attention to, we might have this narrow view of what engagement is. And this isn't always the truth. It's interesting. I work with a lot of schools, and when I ask teachers if they know if a student's engaged, these are the first things that they share. I know that they're engaged because they're looking at me. Well, let's just face it, I can look at anybody, and that does not mean I'm truly engaged. I can be thinking about what I'm going to be cooking for dinner that night, or something that I have to do, or something about work. So those are kind of our narrow views. So engagement is bigger than that. And when students are disengaged, we think they're disengaged because they're not looking at us, or those outward appearance we don't see. We often hear teachers with these kind of comments. I wish they cared. My students, I work so hard on this activity. They're not paying attention. Then we sometimes go into that they've arrived with basic self-management. We start to blame them that they're not engaged because they can't control that emotion to be paying attention, or they're a discipline problem. And just no matter what, we say that often that the student is not succeeding. But this really is a narrow view of what engagement is, because engagement is bigger than that. Engagement really is focusing in on three realms. We are so good as educators on focusing in on the realms of cognitive, the differentiated instruction. If we focus on just that, though, we miss out on the other two realms. And we can't always see the emotional side, or that emotional realm, and even that differentiated connection that we're looking for with our students, or even into the physical realm. So we have to really pay attention to that when we're thinking through for our students. So when you're considering both the emotional, the physical, and the cognitive, it really helps you to not just differentiate, but it helps your instruction for your students, and that they feel really, truly connected with the experience. So for example, if a child is being bullied, or they have some outside trauma that we can't see, or those are the things that we don't always notice, those could be things that help us to give those narrow view. Our students aren't engaged, but it could just be that the students themselves don't want to have that eye contact, because eye contact is a trauma trigger for them or something. So we really have to think about all three areas. Engagement is all three, and all three have to be considered. The cognitive realm, where we differentiate instruction, the emotional realm, where we differentiate the connection for our students, and the physical realm, where we really differentiate our experiences. I shared a little bit about the trauma trigger, and I think this data from Child Trends is very interesting. These are some of those brick walls that our students might hit for engagement, those unseen barriers or baggage that our students really sometimes bring to the table, and can often make a difference in their engagement levels, their learning, and even in their participation. And we've all heard about these. These are the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and they can include things such as poverty, hunger, abuse, bullying. It can even be something as little as they don't think the teacher likes them. From this slide, you can see that in the United States, the percentage of students with 0 to 8 ACEs, meaning they can have one or more of those adverse childhood experiences, you can see that there's a lot of percentage there. 55% of our students have 0 ACEs. So those students don't come with that extra baggage, that wall that they hit when it comes to student engagement. Unfortunately, 45% of our students come with 1 or more ACEs. And in an average class of 28 students, you can pretty much assume that 6 students would have 2 or more adverse childhood experiences, and 3 students would have ongoing weekly trauma. That means they are just disconnected. They've hit the brick wall, and for you as a teacher, you've hit that brick wall for them. So overall, an average of 14 students would have experienced trauma in their childhood in this class of 28. And if you think about struggling learners, you can double these data points. So these are the things that we have to keep in mind for our students that are usually have nothing to do with us as educators, has nothing to do with that I didn't prepare a good lesson, or I didn't, or something that was challenging, or something that was motivating. So what we know is that we need a measurement stick of some type in order to really address these issues, because these measurements can help us identify those brick walls that might be our students' barrier to learning. So what research has shown is that there are 3 different elements to engagement. We begin with the relational, and how do I relate to my peers or teachers? Then we move on to the experiential, that cognitive realm. Am I understanding what I need to learn? Am I making a connection to the content? And then finally, that agentic engagement, where students have voice and choice. When you address all 3 of these, you really can accelerate learner engagement. And I want you to take a deep dive at this slide. You can see that the arrows look like a flywheel. What we say at Meteor Education is that engagement is like a flywheel. You start by building relationships with your students. Students build relationships with the educators. They build relationships with their peers. They even have a relationship with those outside of in the community. You start there. Once students feel that entry point, the wheel starts to turn, and then they can truly become cognitively engaged and really in that moment. And that's when they're really focused on that depth of knowledge and all of the things that we tend to focus probably 90% of our time on as educators. But we first got to build that relationship. Then we can go into the experiential. And then what's the beauty of that is once the flywheel keeps going, and if you know anything about a flywheel, once it goes, it doesn't stop. Then we move into agentic engagement. That's what accelerates it. That's where students truly have voice and choice, and they're truly committed to learning because that is something that they are really wanting to master. And so you can see the flywheel, it just moves along. So a little bit to think about when you start about that relational engagement, remember beginning the flywheel, is really having positive relationships with teachers, adults, and peers. These are the things that are going to help you from hitting that brick wall. You have to really spend time as educators having your students not just work well with you as the educator, but working well with others. They really have to believe, and students truly need to believe that teachers in the school and there's someone, at least one person at a school really truly does care about them, and that they're part of the school community or school culture. It's tough sometimes with students with trauma, those ACEs, to build in those relationships because they're many of the students that are dealing with ACEs are very shy. They may have really a difficult time building relationships with others because they haven't had a good modeling of that. So we really have to pay attention that we have to spend time in this area. And as an educator and as a trainer and going out and working with schools, one of the things I always say is you have to build in those routines in your school first and in your classroom. So you start with the classroom as the catalyst for change. That's where what most majority is going to take place. So educators have a big responsibility, a big weight on their shoulder to build those relationships. But even as an administrator, you have a big role in making sure that the whole community your school, your community outside of school, really embraces that child and your children and your students at your school as well. The relational piece has to come first before you can actually get students interested in learning. We always say that it's the start. You have to start with the heart. Sorry, this way. Start with the heart, not the head. Then you can go into that experiential engagement. Remember, we're back on that flywheel. We don't want to hit those brick walls, but we hit the brick walls because we tend to begin at the cognitive area here. We talk about we want students to understand rigor, and we want to create rigorous tasks, and we want students to self-evaluate and reflect and have ownership of their learning and really that belief. You definitely want that, but you can't begin there. You can't begin by assuming I have this great task. It's at the DOK level. It's aligned to my standards. I'm so excited for my students to get to participate in it. If they don't feel that connection, that relational first. So relational, then to experiential. And ultimately, then you can go into agentic, which I often see schools stop at the relational and the experiential. And they don't always go into the agentic. They try to get there, but it is a little bit more difficult. But this is where students really actively participate in lessons and they construct their own learning. They are telling you as an educator, as a teacher, what they want to learn, how they want to best portray what they've learned, how they want to be able to showcase their learning, what kind of feedback they need from you. They can express their opinions about things. This truly is the engagement that we all really, really want to optimize to. And again, it's that flywheel. Start with the relational, move to the experiential or the cognitive, and move on into the agentic. Probably, if I were to ask you and put you up out of mute, if I asked you what you see most focused on your school, the majority of the folks that I ask, typically it's that middle, the experiential or cognitive is what they focus in on. And there's nothing wrong with that. I get that. We're aligned to the standards. We want to make sure our students are learning what they're supposed to learn. But unfortunately, when we get caught in that and we give up the other two, our students hit that brick wall, and we can have those, maybe the faces of students looking at us, maybe the faces, eyes up, and they look like they're positioned to really pay attention. But then when their test scores come back, we're like, what happened? I don't understand. They weren't really involved in this. They seemed like they were interested. It's oftentimes we've hit that brick wall. And research supports all three of these. And I love research. I love to give research. So all of these slides, I will send these out to you after if you're interested in them. And you can, if you're one like me, want to look at research, and you can take a deeper dive into this. But specifically, this really focuses on this on engagement, interaction, prediction, and impact on happiness. And that we really need to consider, this is from the U.S. National Library of Medicine, the National Institute of Health, and they really say that life satisfaction is negatively affected by achievement orientation and positively affected by teamwork. So we find that engagement, working with others, that teamwork and stuff positively affects our life satisfaction versus being just about achievement for yourself. Cognitive intelligence competencies negatively affected life satisfaction as well. Another study supports that learning requires engagement of both that social and emotional intelligence. Again, that's be that beginning of the flywheel, that relational piece. And so retention and application can be impaired by deficits in that social and emotional intelligence, which is probably why so many schools are really finding time to focus in on the SEL skills, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. I'll align a few things to those as well. But there needs to be that focus because students need for some students, the only place to really feel that connection with others is in the school setting. And this is a great study from UCF. And this is what happens to students in a high stress situation. And actually, it happens to us as adults as well. So what you can see is there's a spectrum here of cognitive abilities. And if you go to the left on where it says low stress, you can see that recipients, meaning you, yourself, your students, can process an average of 7 messages per communication episode. So as I'm standing in front of you as a teacher, I can process 7 things you're really saying to me at that time about whatever it is you're trying to teach me. And information is usually processed at the average grade level of about 10th grade in a general population. Now, again, this is for adults, but you can kind of look at that from a student perspective as well. What happens, though, they have found from this study is that in high stress situations, all the way to the right, recipients process only 3 messages per communication episode. And on average, they're at about -4 grade levels below what they can generally process information on. So if I'm processing at a 10th grade level, at a normal low stress level, if I have high stress, I'm going to be at a 6th grade level. This study has a lot of implications, especially with everything going on right now with the COVID. There's a lot of stress for not just our students, but for our adults. And our adults, and I want to specifically shout out to our educators who are trying to reframe everything that they're doing right now to impact their students and make learning as enjoyable as possible, especially for those that have to distance learn. And it's a stressful situation. And then we throw more things at our teachers sometimes to, oh, you got to do this, this, and this. They're in high stress just trying to maintain things that are going on in their own personal lives. And then we want them to be able to communicate to students. They're not able to communicate those messages. So we really have to think about this, and we really have to give them some grace when it comes to the learning during this pandemic time as well. Your brain can literally be hijacked due to any stressful situation that happens to you. It's not that a student doesn't want to learn, they literally cannot learn. This is another brick wall that we hit. It's called the amygdala hijack, where our reptilian brain shuts down and it keeps us from really being engaged. What happens is we just get so focused on the stressful event, we can't focus on anything else. And it doesn't matter how much we are into the moment. If we cannot get out of that hijack moment, we're going to shut down, and there's not going to be any learning. I share this because I want you to think about those students that are worried about where their next bill is going to come from, or even are their parents, maybe they've heard their parents, worried about what's going to happen with their jobs and things that are going to happen in the future due to what's happening right now in the pandemic, or even before the pandemic. There's been trauma. Trauma's been for many students, as you saw from the ACEs. They can really take over their brain. And it does not do that just for students. Again, it's for adults as well. And another set of research is this from Dr. Lou Cozolino. He's a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University. And he's done this study, and he found that without relationships, the brain literally shrinks. And he's found that really those strong relationships really can stimulate your emotions and can really keep you in the moment. It's really an interesting study, and it's scary in some ways to think that your brain is shrinking because you have no relationships. I think about, I kind of feel like that's happening, and I know I keep bringing up COVID, but we are living in this moment of the COVID right now, of those aging folks that are in nursing homes, and they're not doing so well. Well, perhaps their brains are shrinking because they have no contact with their family or their loved ones. They literally have nobody to have that relational connection with. And remember, all of these things build into going to that flywheel where we begin with the relational piece. If we don't have those, we cannot be ready to learn. We're going to hit a brick wall with our students. So there is a science around measuring engagement. We're really all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, really moving from your self-interest to community interest. You're moving up, your time preferences increases, each level builds on the layers below. We know that our goal is to go from a physiological up to self-transcendence. But can a student really move up this ladder when they're hungry, when they're scared, when they're tired? And again, these are the brick walls that are hitting our students. We can't move them up to some of these things because of things that are happening in their lives and the traumas. So what are those skills that students need to have to move up the hierarchy or to bypass the brick walls? 2 areas that we find the skills that most educators, and for those on this call today, You're probably familiar with both of them and probably really doing a deeper dive into one or the other for your school or for your district. And that's the CASTLE framework and the big 5 domains from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So you can see both of these frameworks are really aligned and support skills that the students need in order to be successful in school. Building those relationships, it starts from the relationships, building that so we don't hit those brick walls. And they really center around goal setting for students. So you can see here on the left is the CASTLE framework, and you can see it starts in the center with that social and emotional learning, really, and then it kind of goes outward that first students have to become self-aware, self-management, responsible decision-making needs to be a part of their repertoire of learning. Relationship skills, again, relationship, you're going to see that a lot, and social awareness. From there, you build out into your classrooms and build that curriculum into your school and the school-wide practices and policies that are going to be predominant across the entire campus. And ultimately, if you're a strong community school, you're building it out into your partnerships with the other family and partnerships outside of. I find that I've seen a balance of both of these at schools. I'm hearing a lot more about CASTLE. Prior to that, the big 5 was huge. More people were talking about this one more so. And you can see that the big 5 domains really are about the task performance, emotional regulation, collaboration, open-mindedness, and engaging with others. And then you can kind of see some of the key things out from them. If you are not familiar with these, you can just Google them. You can find out a lot of information. And what you'll find is that a lot of our curriculum that has been written around social emotional skills are really built around either one or both of these frameworks. I want to round out this section before I move into some information about how do you truly measure engagement, and just give you a little bit more data. You can see here that this was a study that was done of a group of high school students in the United States. And they found that students that were provided social emotional skills and cognitive skills, and they were both in the regular high school graduates, they had higher positive outcomes. Our GED graduates, unfortunately, they had high cognitive skills when they graduated. Unfortunately, because they were not at school, they were not there in present, and they were doing things off on their own. They had low social and emotional skills. And obviously, unfortunately, for high school dropouts that did not go back and get their GED diploma, you can see that there's low social emotional and low cognitive skills in both of those. We also saw a study here that the average correlation between the big 5 dimensions, which I just shared, and job performance, you can see that overall job performance was a lot higher, task performance, but there were some counterproductive work behaviors when things were not present. And the average effects of social emotional skills on occupational outcomes here as well. Interesting enough, there is a bigger impact on occupational outcomes than even parental income or socioeconomic status. A lot of times everyone believes, if the parents are rich, or you live in a white suburbia neighborhood, or that those students are going to be smarter, they're going to have better schooling, there's just more given to them. But what we have found is the students that have gone through the years and have that socio-emotional skills really taught to them, doesn't matter what school they've been in, that's had more of an impact in their lives than the parental income or that socioeconomic status. And there's some more information on that as well. So student engagement, remember, is an outcome of social, emotional, and cognitive skills. It is a discrete neurological state, because remember that amygdala hijack, and emotion is really closely linked to engagement. So we hit the brick wall for engagement if we don't focus on the emotional. And putting that really simply, and we share this data a lot from Dr. Imardina Yang, is that it is literally neurobiologically impossible to think deeply about things that you don't care about. So if you don't care about something, you honestly cannot really focus in on it and go deep with it. So I'm going to now walk you through just a series of slides that shows you a couple of tools that really measure student engagement. So we know that we want students to be engaged. I kind of want to backtrack here a minute. We know that we want to begin with that relational piece. but we don't often know where our students are, because again, the eyes are facing us and they tend to be nodding their heads, but maybe they're not really focusing in on what we're doing. We don't always know about their readiness to learn and readiness to be engaged. So there's this new tool that's called Rhithm that we found through our research. And I just absolutely love this tool. It's a 1 minute, about 1 to 2 minute assessment that students can take as many times as they want in a given day. And what it does is it really helps to determine if students are ready for learning. So this is that readiness. This is kind of that looking for our students prior to being engaged. We want them to be fully engaged in the moment, but we don't know if other things are kind of taking over their brain, if they're having an amygdala hijack or whatever. And this is an emoji-based, very easy check-in. I'm just going to show you what I mean by that. There's 5 questions that a student is asked. The first question they're asked is something on their mental status, and it's what is it like in your head today? And there's 6 answers that a student can answer, and they're emoji based. So that makes it super easy for young students. We have a lot of schools that use this. And really thinking about, it's really hard to really be focused on something. And I shared this before, when you have other symptoms and your mental status is not so well because you're hungry or you're sad or maybe have an injury or such. So that can show up in the classroom. The students would simply answer that question. The second question they would answer is, how is your energy today? And really talking about, how do they feel? Are they hyper? Are they out of control? How many monster drinks have they had today? Because they could make them super hyper or not. Really focusing in on how you feel. Are you tired? Are you exhausted? The third question is, how do you feel today? Just about your body. What is that emotional status? How do you feel? Are you sad? Are you happy? Are you anxious? Are you angry? Now, keep in mind, these answers can change throughout the day, because I may come in the morning feeling kind of happy, and then my best friend and I got in a fight during lunch. And if I were to ask the same question later in the afternoon, I might be sad or I might be anxious because of that. So that's why I share that this tool is such a cool tool. Because if you are at middle or high school, or even in elementary, where students are progressing and going to different teachers throughout the day, a teacher can quickly self-assess to see if their students are ready for learning through this tool. Within 5 minutes, it's real-time data, and you can know if students are ready, and then you can move on and get ready for true school engagement. And the fourth question is, how does your body feel today? So it's about your body and really making sure that, are you injured? Are you hungry? There's a lot of COVID blaming right now going on. There's a lot of shame. It's not as bad now as it was at the beginning, but at the beginning when people had COVID, it was like, ooh, stay away, stay away. But sometimes kids just come to school even if they don't feel good. I know teachers that go to school even when they don't feel good. Now, in today's pandemic and everything, that's not a good thing. And how's your social life going today? So what's that social connection that you have? Are you in a disagreement? Did you and your mom get in an argument on the way to school? These are 5 questions. They're developed by clinicians to determine a child's social and emotional state. Simple questions that a student goes in, logs in. If you have, I think it's Class Links and some of those other programs, you can align them right there, same passwords that you have. And they really can determine a child's readiness to learn and engagement level. After the student answers the 5 questions, the student gets the information immediately, and they're given one activity to do. So the student gets their own personalized activity to do to help them to become self-regulate. Because if you go back to the CASTLE skills, or the big 5 domains that I shared, one of the things is really students self-regulating themselves. But even students don't always know why they're feeling the way they're feeling. So if their answers show that they're super hyper or whatever, there's a mathematical algorithm in the background of this program. It'll spit out the type of activity that a student needs to do, and they can do it right in front of the computer. And it helps them to get in the framework so they're ready for learning. So that's number 1. But it also gives the information to the teacher, which I think it wasn't the intent. They said that the creators of this said that was not the intent, but the intent really has helped. It's been twofold. Students learn to self-regulate, But teachers also now allows them to know precisely how to really respond to instruction, or really the environment or the lesson. Because remember, students can't be truly engaged if they hit that brick wall. If I have a classroom and you look at the data from an entire classroom perspective, and I see that my students are, most of them are not ready to learn, why would I want to put some of my best activities and tasks that I've created at that given moment? I may need to pull back as a class and do something else to get everyone refocused and ready for learning. And it's all around the theory of self-regulation. The colors depict, that low to high data and where a student is for the day. And again, you can do this for more than one class period. And it can really help you as an educator to determine how you can best get ready for that learning. I think it's cool because it also gives some real-time alerts, lets you know if students can answer questions. After they answer, they can actually put some information in the box. And I had one student put in, I feel like my brain is going to pop open. Well, I don't have students. I should have said that. I didn't frame that correctly. I had someone put that in. I actually had some of my colleagues answer this, because we've had teachers do this as well for the administrators. And I thought one of my colleagues had put in, I feel like my brain is going to pop open, because that came under an alert for me as the supervisor. Come to find out, I immediately called him, because that was my ding, ding, ding. I need to go find out what's going on. How can I support you? Just like a teacher would do for a student. And come to find out, it was actually his son that had filled it out for him that morning. But it was very telling that it's great information, because it also helped me to build that relationship. Because immediately I had that phone call, immediately I was able to reach out and say, how can I help you? How can I support you? And there's a lot of other analytics that go along with this tool. You can get baseline data for the entire school. You can get it for an entire district. Really interesting. This data is interesting to me. This was an entire district that took this data. And if you look here, teachers were doing wellness checks here as well as students. And this was, if you look here under emotional happy, you can see that 71% of said they were in orange, they were happy, and 84% in blue said they were happy. So my question for you is, who's the orange? Is it the students that are taking the 5 question assessment, or the teacher? And the interesting thing is the teacher was not as happy as the students on this given day. So you can see in orange, 71% of the students teachers were happy. In blue, 84% were happy for that given day in that school. I find it very interesting. Sometimes you're not sure, you think the data is just going to be on your students, but it's equally important for your teachers as well. And here's another one, anxious. Now that I've already told you the information, you can see that here you got, for this school, 7% of the students were anxious, yet 25% of the teachers were anxious on this given day, at this given time. So that tells me as an administrator, there's something I need to do or work through with this school. Something is amiss. I need to work with my faculty and find out how I can do to support them. That's why I put here the whole book here. You can go to habitatforheroes.org, and this is a great book with lots of strategies. And this book talks about why a teacher cannot be ready to help students if they're not ready, if they're not fully in the moment themselves. So we always think teachers are just going to wake up in the morning, they're bright and ready to learn and teach, and woo, everything's just going to be simpatico, and we're just so excited about everything. But we have stress too. So how can we help our teachers to become whole? One of the things this book starts with is that literally there are more teachers stressed out than there are from veterans that come back from war. So it's very telling that we have got to help our students as well. And going back to that, where I said it was about self-regulation. Remember, self-regulation really needs to be learned by both your students and your teachers, because the more I practice you become stronger the more you practice self-regulation. It's not just in how are you doing, but what's up. So you've got to learn to kind of self-regulate yourself as well in order for learning to take place, and in order for us to have a really good day as educators. And one last note I want to share is that we should all be aware of sickness behavior, especially with everything going on right now. We can all catch sickness behavior. So it is really about behavior changes that develop in an ill individual during the course of an infection, which think about this from the pandemic. It's not always accompanied by fever and AIDS survival, but they include all of the different things that we see here. But it can literally be passed on to someone that is sitting right next to you. We can all catch that behavior. And I would be remiss if I didn't share how COVID has heightened the need for self-regulation and understanding of that sickness behavior. We know that students are showing concern for returning to school with there's a heightened anxiety as schools are starting to think about opening back up, and then they're closing and then they're opening back up. There's this high anxiety. It's important that we understand our students' needs, and especially when there's distance learning. This was a survey that we did at the center. We did this ourselves. We got 7,500 students to answer the survey, and we asked them, I connect online with my teacher every day. 59% said not so much or to no. Well, that tells me a lot that if we're a district or a school that's online learning, that's not so good. There's not that relational. Remember, going back to the flywheel, if we're not building that relationship, they truly are not going to get into that cognitive learning. Another question we asked is, I work at home online each day for 70% for how many hours they work. 70% of our students said they work online at home. So they're schooling from home for 3 hours or less. So that's kind of telling there too. And I hear this from teachers all around across country, and not just the ones that I'm working with, but also my friends. And they said there's some kids that they haven't even logged on. They're just not, they don't feel that same urgency. They don't have that relationship to the computer, or maybe there's other things, but they are finding that they are having difficulty with that. So it's really important that we support our online and our students and build those relationships. We've got this sample schedule here that's really important. And the sample schedule is, if you are teaching online, which we have a lot of teachers around the country doing, really giving the students a schedule, because what we know is what gets scheduled gets done. And so we put into the schedule during the day brain breaks and time for you to work with peers and direct instruction. So kids know what's expected of them, and they're helping to build those relationships with their teachers. So when they do go back to school. One thing I did hear a lot, and I'm sure many of you heard, when the pandemic began in March, one of the things they said when schools shut down was that it was easier for teachers to move into the online learning during that time because they had already built relationships, and students actually were showing up a little bit more so than now. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, there wasn't that relationship building. We started school in September, August, September, whenever you began, but you didn't know those students. So you have a classroom of students, and your only way of getting to really truly know them is online and through Zoom or whatever, ConnectEd or whatever you're using. So it's extremely important that there's a plan for you, if you're the administrator of a school, on how you're going to really support your teachers to have a schedule that's going to create for them times to really build those relationships. And we have to give up that. Sometimes that means we have to give up that cognitive, that the standards learning. We got to pull back from that, because relationships are going to be at the crust of it, or we're going to keep hitting that brick wall. And before we end, I also wanted to share with you another tool that measures students' readiness to learn and to be engaged. But I share with you, the one that for readiness and learning, which I just shared with you. But there's another one that is a tool called Nira, or Immersion, and it's like a little wearable wristwatch, and it's very similar to a Fitbit, and it measures the neurobiological response of what's happening at the time. It kind of gives dings. So it tells you, students, it kind of measures their oxytocin and cortisol levels to see how really engaged students are. We have a lot of schools that are using this device, even through their online things, and really being able to tell if students are in the moment and are they immersed. And this was used for media when it first began. And the whole point was to see when you could tell when students were, when it was done with media and in military training, it was to see, when you were watching a movie, when were you truly engaged? So they were able to take all this data for like 15 years, and they were really able to start measuring then what does it look like in a student's the cortisol levels, all of the different oxytocin, the heart rate, the pulse, all that stuff. And they were able to put an algorithm together. And now they're using it in schools as well to determine when our students engage. We use this in trainings with teachers a lot. It's really interesting when you teach a teacher a strategy and then they go back into the school, that if the students are using this tool, they have the little things around their wrist, and they use that strategy in the classroom, and then they see live data to see if it actually is engaging students. And interesting enough, we found that one of the students that you wouldn't think was really interested in the lesson, their eyes were not facing forward. They were not looking like that engaged person that we think engagement is. They were the ones that were most immersed in the learning. And we could tell that from a neurobiological piece of data. So we have two pieces of data. So we have the rhythm, or two pieces, things you can measure with. We have the rhythm measurement, which really measures, are you ready to learn? And then the anira, which measures during engagement, is, are you truly immersed in the learning? And again, all of these tools are directly related to all of whether it's the castle or the 5 domains. And they really help schools in lesson design, proximal engagement, even talking about productive student conversations. So I'm going to end with one more piece of research. And this is a student, this was a primary research question that we asked 1.6 million students in real time. What is the likely impact on student learning as a result of shifting school at home? And where do we see success with this shift? What we found is that 1.6 million students in the United States, data showed that post-data analysis from beginning Wednesday, March 11th through the end of April 30th, this was just for 1 month, we found that students without access to meaningful instruction after those school closures for that 1 month, they might lose up to 49% of their potential growth by the start of next school year, which was already in next school year. So it's even old data, but that's how much some of our teachers are dealing with right now. Their students may have started in August, September, and they're already down 49% of what they should be at if we had been doing face-to-face learning. And that's about 5 months of lost learning, which can be a severe setback. And if you take back students that are already coming from behind, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And some of the other key findings from that study is that 76% of schools showed decreased instructional activity after closure. So that was a reason why. Students, which I already shared, they're on track to lose up to 49% of their gains. Worst case prediction is the widening of the achievement gap is 18%. So that's worst case, which is still terrible. Struggling readers on track to fall behind their peers by an additional 6%. In some districts, we did find some good news. It's always good news. Are succeeding with online learning. So the platform, if done correctly, again, going back to that scheduling, putting in that relational piece, because we are hitting brick walls without that. So remember, it's not the student's fault. It is not the student's fault if they're not learning. We know that crisis learning is distress learning, and we can retain less. We know that from the studies that we've talked about. And if you think about accelerated learning, if you think about that flywheel, which I shared, and really that engagement, they all align to John Hattie's visible learning, because if you look at his top 3 effect sizes that have the highest effect for learning, it's teacher expectations of students, teacher self-confidence, student self-confidence, and that all comes built around relationships. So we really have to structure our time for our students to go beyond just that cognitive learning. It'll break down those brick walls that we have. We can break them down. We just can't focus on one thing. We have to focus on all 3, the cognitive realm, the emotional realm, the physical realm, and really focus in on that, thinking about engagement, not just through cognitive engagement, but through relational engagement and agentic engagement. And we truly can break down the walls for our students. So my question is, what's it like in your head today? How is your energy level today? How do you feel today? How does your body feel today? And how's your social life going today? You got to take care of yourself as educators as well. It starts with you. You start with yourself taking care. Then you could be there for your students, build those relationships with the students, and I promise you'll have a much better year. You'll break down those brick walls. So if you should have any questions about anything that I shared with you today, I'll see if there's anything, I don't know if anything's popped up in the chat. You can contact me at rbrus@meteoreducation.com, or you can reach out to my colleague, Kim Bolzer at meteoreducation.com, and she'll be happy to share anything with you. Thank you and have a great, great afternoon.